in the presentation from Mr. Wood, he had talked about some of the things going on, especially in the Mid-Atlantic district. And President Snow did have an opportunity to speak with President Harmon. Uh, for the ACELC, one of our concerns is simply that ecclesiastical supervision is as transparent as possible. So, in the interest of that, um, President Harmon shared some things with President Snow and said he could make those things known to us. This is being recorded, so
Absolutely. Yeah, and so this is public knowledge. In terms of the Arlington situation with the pastor who resigned, um, there was already discipline taking place there. Likely, it would have ended up in the same place as it did. Um, what ended up happening is with all the extra publicity, that really drove the district president to resign. And again, you can't defrock someone who's unfrocked themselves, right? So just as you can't excommunicate a member who said, I don't want to be a member anymore, that's kind of the situation there. So, and the Easton situation, um, in both of those situations, it needs to be clarified that the lay people that had objections were invited and asked repeatedly to be part of the conversation. And in both of those situations, those that had concerns refused. They did not participate. They chose not to. They chose instead to go into public media or media of some fashion or another. With the Easton situation specifically, smaller congregation, I think they have about 70 some in worship on a regular basis. A couple, two of them, a husband and wife, with a couple other folks that kind of went along, didn't like what the congregation was doing. They were renting, I think, their sanctuary for a Hispanic ministry to have worship in their sanctuary or in their building. I don't know the details of that. I should apologize first. I didn't know enough details to kind of share this yesterday when Mr. Wood was here. I wish I could have done that, but that being what it is, that couple in Easton were concerned that they were allowing that there could be illegal aliens that were participating in that worship service. Both the law enforcement and the church essentially said it's not up to us to enforce that. That's not up to you to enforce that. That's up to law to enforce that. In the midst of that, there were some other objections that came along. All along the way, that couple was continually invited to be a part of the process, and they chose not to. The congregation as a whole did not agree with them, did not go along with them, and because the real challenge, I think, especially in the Easton case, but also in the Arlington case, as I understand it, and again, I have limited knowledge, but in both of those cases, essentially, lay people went outside the system to seek their way. And I don't think any one of us in this meeting today want to encourage that, right? If two of your members decide to go on the Tim Allman podcast because they don't like how you practice closed communion or whatever, right? That's not how our system is designed. We may not like the system, we may need to improve the system, but whatever the system is, we need to use the processes that we have in place. So I would just simply defend President Harmon. He was acting in good faith according to the processes we are given to do the work that he did.
please extend to President Harmon our appreciation for that. And also, just if you can give this back to him, you know, the more sort of with the fact finding and just the clarity on here's the actual things to the degree that it's made public, that would be helpful for us as well. So if you could.
The hard part is to figure out how do you publish that.
This is yeah, is it so there's some clearly there's issues here that need to continue to be worked out. And from our side, I mean, we're not in the presidium. There are things that you guys, issues. It's just like with a child, they don't appreciate everything that parents have to do, right? They couldn't understand it. I appreciate that that's where I'm at. Um, but this is what we'd like to see. So the more as
That's
the
why I thought it would be important for me to share what I did today.
very good. Thank you very, very much.
So yeah, I didn't want Pastor Stecker. I didn't want him to think that I was completely blowing him off and was just an excuse so I'd never have to answer the question. So thank you. Yesterday you asked, "What do I think about the slogan Sola Scriptura?" And what does that really mean, especially because of the Lutheran appreciation for the church fathers and for many traditional teachings in the church, and in fact, an appeal to the point that the Lutheran confessions are consistent with the historical confession of the church, and all of those things are true. I think a really helpful, maybe a couple places that are really helpfully just kind of lay this out really clearly would be Luther's on the councils in the church, in the first section, and also on the treatise to the German nobility. Actually, he actually deals with the same sorts of questions in both of these, even though these are written about 18 years apart from each other. But especially on the councils in the church in the beginning, he points out that he's making an argument against both kind of popery and not popery like the Pope, um, and and conciliarism, and he's saying, look, any good thing that the council ever did was simply to explain and to assert what is already taught in the scriptures. Um, and he goes on also to point out a number of places how councils and the church fathers will make mistakes, or at least they'll disagree with each other, right? So how can you have a so-called consensus of the fathers when the fathers themselves are disagreeing with each other? And Melanchthon makes the same point in the Apology as well. He talks about um, like what consensus of the fathers are you actually talking about when you say the consensus of the fathers, because they disagree about this, right? Or they disagree about this point, or they disagree about this point. um, so so it's important to remember that when the Lutherans point to the testimony of the fathers, what they're doing is they're showing that what we teach, what we believe, teach, and confess is not new. It's not novel, right? It's not something that we made up in the 16th century, right? They're pointing to the fact that many fathers have taught these things in various ways in the early centuries of the church, right? Or that some of the councils taught these things. So when we teach things like justification through faith, these are things that are actually taught by figures such as Ambrose and Augustine, and they weren't condemned, right? They are recognized as being faithful members of the church, right? So so the appeal to the fathers, or the appeal to tradition, I guess we could say in this case, is not so much an appeal to another authority, but just a way of indicating, a way of illustrating, or a way of giving an example of how what the Lutherans are confessing and teaching is actually consistent with the scriptures. So that's what sola scriptura is, and um I think that it's actually consistent to do that, right? To show that what we are teaching is really from the scriptures, right? That's where we always go to. That's what we always look for. Um, and by the way, we can see this. We can see that it's not novel because others have taught this as well in the history of the church. So that's I think the difference from setting up, say, like an alternative tradition along the side, or even a tradition that might be seen to have like some kind of equal weight, or just because it is an explanation of scripture, right? That's the distinction, I think, between those things. So
Pastor Ben Tice of St. John's Lutheran Church in Brunswick, Missouri. Thank you all for the conference. It's been wonderful to hear all of you. My question would have originally been for Mr. Tim Wood, but since he's not here, I guess I'll pose it to the two professors up here. One of the things that Mr. Wood was talking about yesterday was the idea of any of our pastors who would go on to become professors, even either at our universities or at our two seminaries. I think he had said should probably have like a minimum of 7 years in the ministry before going on to being a professor. I was kind of wondering your thoughts on that. Do you think that would be an adequate amount of time? Do you think there should be less time? Do you think there should be more time? And then a question related to that, do you think there's a point when a professor has been there so long that it may be wise for him to consider a call back out into parish ministry?
Yeah, I right now the practice is 5 years. This is what we observe at least it's what we observe at the seminaries. So even if there's somebody that we would really like to call it, we almost always will wait at least 5 years. I think there's a lot of wisdom in having a number out there that you almost always follow. I also would say there can sometimes be wisdom in recognizing that maybe there's somebody who's, uniquely gifted to serve as a professor, and maybe he hasn't been a pastor for 5 years. Maybe he's been a pastor for 4 years. And maybe it's okay to call that guy, right? But again, these are decisions that are made according to wisdom and according to circumstances. I think in general, to have like as a strong guideline to say 5 years, maybe even 7 years is good and fine and beneficial to the church. I think it's even if somebody is very gifted as a teacher, as a professor, to be able to draw upon parish experience simply it's not it does add credibility, but it's not just that it adds credibility. It's that it actually gives that faculty person um, a uh, a framework for thinking about what he knows, right? And for talking about how to practice it, right? So if a professor is going to be teaching pastors, he has to be able to kind of be able to pick up on his own experiences in the congregation and then make those connections for his students. That's why I think it is. Yeah, I mean it's actually a good idea, and probably 99% of the time we should do something like that.
What he said. Seven. Seven's an arbitrary number. I guess it's biblical, right? But yeah, I don't know. 3, 5, 6, 7. The Concordias don't seem to have the same requirement that the seminaries have established. I know at Concordia Chicago, we asked for like a minimum of 4 or 5. But to be honest, the bench for potential professors is pretty thin right now. And having people who are qualified, who have experience, and also the right temperament and the ability to work within a Concordia University system, there's not as many as you would think. So I know other Concordias have brought in, and I don't want to name names, but brought in faculty members who have no experience at all, and in fact they're ordained in their installation. But that's, I would say, the anomaly rather than the norm. I think it is helpful. Teaching at a Concordia is different than teaching at the seminary. We teach pre-sem students, but we also teach a host of prospective church work students, DCEs, LTEs, classical educators, um, deaconess students. And then we're also teaching a wide variety of students who are not Lutheran, some of them who aren't Christian. And so we are teaching in just a very different context than the seminary. And I think having pastoral experience is helpful. But at the same time, how do I want to say this? We aren't parish pastors too, right? and we are doing something that is, in a way, there's a connection between teaching a Bible class and doing a confirmation class, but there's also something different than being in a classroom setting. And then there's also an academic aspect of our specific office that is distinct and unique. And it doesn't make it better than a parish pastor, it doesn't make it necessarily lower than a parish pastor either. And to bring these things together, I think, is helpful, but I don't know what a magic number is. Uh, Mr. Wood said 7. Well, I have 6 years, so I guess I should. But you asked, should, if you're there too long, should you go back to perhaps a congregation? I don't know. I would be open to it. I have a colleague who's been teaching for 24 years. Many of us, while we're at the Concordias, we're also preaching regularly. Sometimes we help with vacancies, sometimes we're not, but that's not uncommon. It's not as if we're divorced from the life of the church, but pulpit supply is not the same thing as serving a congregation and being their shepherd for a long period of time. Yeah, I hate to say it depends on the situation. So
Thank you, John Raby. I'm a member here at Good Shepherd. Question for Pastor Stecker. You indicated that the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox are able to present a more unified picture of life in their church. How do you think that came to be with such a worldwide communion, especially the Catholics? And is there anything in that, if there is an answer to that, that we as Lutherans could replicate or try to learn from? Thank you.
Yeah, so your question is kind of how do they get to this point that they're at now where they've got the ability and the articulation to kind of paint this picture?
Yeah, did they have a meeting and talk about it?
That they sorry, what?
Did they have a meeting?
Did they have a meeting before to
Oh, well, I think so. Yeah. I mean, yeah, so some of it has to do with resources, some of it has to do with I think that they've got things like Catholic Answers. Bishop Barron's been at it for a while. So they've once you get, this is kind of one of the goals with On the Line too, is like once you get kind of something that's big, you can build other things off of that, right? So we're going to be likely launching a new podcast with Luther Classical College and using On the Line as kind of a springboard to help get that off the ground. Because if you just throw things out into the YouTube sphere, it's sometimes really difficult to just get to that first 1,000 subscribers. But if you can, if Bishop Barron has Matt Fradd on or vice versa, like then that shares an audience. So things grow quicker institutionally as things start to excel. So that's one aspect. Yeah, I think that they maybe just saw this earlier, and part of that might be because they have more specialists in the Catholic Church. Back to even to the previous question, we kind of run everything right through the parish ministry. For pros or cons, I don't have any strong opinions on that previous question, but one of the negatives, at least practically speaking, is that they'll get people into certain areas of expertise very quickly, and then they'll have experts in a certain field, right? So that might be a theological field, it might be a practical field like media, for instance. I mean, Word on Fire Ministries with Bishop Barron, I don't know if they've succeeded on this, but they were fundraising money to try to have an order of priests that were basically media evangelists. So to do things like what Bishop Barron's doing, for him to train up, I don't know what the number was, 6, a dozen, to do what he's doing, and for him to kind of train them in that field, right? So they see very clearly that the 25-year-old that's going to enter back into the church, their first contact is not going to be going into the local parish. They're going to spend dozens and dozens and dozens of hours researching online in the room while they're driving before they make that choice of whether or not to go to a church.
Leonard Feaster here at Good Shepherd, when you were talking about how the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox got to the point where they are, I was thinking about a cardinal that in my Methodist household, we watched faithfully every Sunday night, and I can't come up with his name.
Oh, yeah, Sheen. Yeah.
And so that was like a 30-minute presentation by him, and he was very charismatic and spoke generally. I mean, I can't think of any strict Catholicism that he preached, but just general scriptural stuff. And on the other side, my introduction to television was Billy Graham, and that was hours long. So I think that might have been an inroad for them. And also the Roman Catholics they've had EWT, and they had EW radio long before they had television. So they had a big cadre of media people all ready to step into the television sphere and from there. But yeah, I've listened to more EWTN on the radio than I have LPR driving across America. Sorry to say. That's my only comment. Maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it is still in our DNA. If you think back to Lutheran Hour Ministries, I mean, when Lutheran Hour Ministries, we even at Trinity, we still had the plaque out there that said this: we're a Church of the Lutheran Hour, or whatever it is, right? So there was a time where LCMS punched way above its weight in this sphere. I mean, Issues Etc. has done great work and stuff too, but we have lagged. If you were to go back to that, I would suspect that back during Lutheran Hour Ministries, we were much more comparable with the Catholic Church as far as reach goes compared to our size. So we have lost that a little bit. I mean, part of the critique too that I was bringing up was if you were to go through, Trent Horn, if you're going to go through Catholic Answers, if you're going to go through Matt Fradd, Pints with Aquinas, Bishop Barron, etc., like most of their content is going to be talking about the theological beauty of the Catholic Church, right? That's their foot forward. And sometimes what we fall into is what Lutheran media falls into infighting or identifying issues or trying to tackle worship practices or whatever it is, or political things, or running presidential elections, things like that. And we get sidetracked on that, which internally people are interested in. And if you watch some channels that lean into that mostly, you'll see a big fluctuation on views. They'll have a standard video that have like 300 views, and then they'll do some kind of controversial thing about voting in the LCMS or something, and that'll get like 2,500, 3,000 views. I think that's kind of an issue. I'm not saying there's no place for anything like that or we police it, but I'm just saying we need to think to use this sphere primarily to talk about the beauty of the Lutheran Church. That's what the Catholics are doing, understanding that if someone watches Bishop Barron articulate about the narrative arcs in Genesis, that they're going to be attracted to that, and then they're going to look further into the Catholic Church. Someone stumbles across the LCMS and it's some kind of infighting or some kind of gotcha thing about something that's going on. They might watch that, but they're not going to then say, awesome, I can't wait to go check out the local LCMS church. So I think we have to think coherently about what topics are we putting out, and is our primary goal to both inform internally those that are in the LCMS that want to know more about what we believe, teach, and confess, but then also as a way of showcasing that beauty out to the broader Christian or interested world.
Zach Corey, pastor at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in Wahoo. Thank you all for your presentations. I don't know what the limit on questions is. I have at least 39. I guess I'll just go with one for now. Dr. Grobing, would you please, especially because this is on the radio and there may be non-Lutherans who are listening in on this, can you speak to the objection against sola scriptura, that slogan, that it allows for contradicting interpretations? Because I think this also applies to maybe even the purpose of this organization, of the ACELC, of that even within our own church body, we have different interpretations on worship practice and these kinds of things. So if you could just share what thoughts you have regarding that sola scriptura allows for contradicting interpretations. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a common argument, right, from outside of Protestantism, that we need some kind of authority to tell us what the scriptures actually say. But of course, how is anybody communicating with anybody about any of these things? They're using language, right? So if the Pope says, well, you can't really understand the scriptures, so I have to explain it to you, then what happens when, I read the Pope's encyclical and I don't understand what he says, right? Then I need an interpreter, right? So is it going to be my priest, and then I don't understand what the priest says, right? So the point that I'm saying is that the Lord himself has spoken in the scriptures, and he has, while there may be some passages that are confusing to us, especially in our fallen nature, there are also passages that are very clear, right? This is a point that Scripture itself makes, right? That, for example, the New Testament and the epistles, the Gospels and the epistles are especially emphasize the fact that the work of Christ is made clear in Jesus' own teaching and his own works, and certainly in his passion and his resurrection, and that these are explained clearly by the apostles, those who write the scriptures, right, through inspiration by God, right, using God's words. And that all pastors then who are trained, right, and indeed any layperson who hears and reads the scriptures then can understand and be edified by the scriptures, right? This is the purpose of inspiration, right? Through 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, right? For teaching, reproof, correction, training in righteousness, and also Romans 15 for consolation, right? So the scriptures themselves are actually the word of God communicated, and it's in language. So the point about understanding what the scriptures say has to do with simply understanding language like anybody might communicate to anybody else, right? It's not esoteric. We don't need some kind of hierarchy. We don't need some kind of expert in that sense, right? We simply need to be able to understand the language. Now, people might say, well, but look at all the divisions that there are in the church. So obviously, you do need some kind of authority. But again, what's the cause of that, right? I think we've talked a lot about just over the last couple of days that there are issues of sin, right, and brokenness in us and how we want to respond to that word, right, which leads to these kinds of divisions. And as has been pointed out, it's not that these divisions don't exist in church bodies that claim to have an authoritative interpreter. It's just that they are controlled in different ways, right? There are different groups that are allowed to sort of exist underneath this broad umbrella because of kind of the motivation and the goals of those other church bodies, right? So they can put on the appearance of a better kind of unity under a certain kind of an authority than, say, what Protestants might have. But in fact, when it comes to agreement about what the scripture says, there are disagreements due to obstinacy and fallenness and sinfulness. So the thing to keep in mind is that God himself speaks, right? Exodus 20. His voice speaks to the people of God. God himself writes the first scriptures in the tablets. And then God says, and now, from now on, you will hear prophets, you will hear people speaking in my name, and they are going to say the same thing that I have been saying. Right? And so this is actually why, if you don't want to get confused about language, we should actually avoid the genealogies of attempted interpretation. And we should go to the source, the mouth of the one who said it, and listen and submit ourselves to that and work with each other to understand and come to agreement about it, about what we think it means.
I'm Pastor Jack Kirk. I'm here with KNNA Radio. Just a curiosity. It's been mentioned about podcasts and social media in the past. I was wondering what you thought about the place of artificial intelligence as far as our discussions are concerned. What kind of impact can we perhaps expect, and what might be the proper use of it in context of just what we're talking about here? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that it definitely is going to be more prominent in the futures. I think undoubted. One of the things I did, so when I wrote my speech, I have a vicar, so I sent it to him, and I went over and on his email, Google had summarized it like in 3 lines. I was like, oh, I didn't even think. Let me run this through AI and see what it says. And so I ran it through AI, and it was stunning at how accurate it was, and also just the flattery, which I think people have pointed out. AI will flatter you up and down, which is bad for you, right? But the other thing, it was just remarkably precise on even just our confessional little Lutheran world, it was able to critique, because I asked it for critique and analysis. And so it was able to critique me using, and I don't know what it used as sources, but like confessional, traditional Lutheran sources would say your speech was weak on this, that, and the other. And I was like, wow, that was pretty impressive. Now, as to how that exactly translates to podcasts, I don't know. It's certainly this something that's going to be more and more prominent, and maybe you guys even use it in some of your research. I don't know if you ask it and then it searches for sources for you or different angles to take. But as it improves every month, it's just going to be a more and more powerful tool. And as for whether it and the rest of the internet is demon controlled, it may be. It may be. And yet we're going to be using it. So I don't know what you want to do with that, but
Yeah.
I'll say something. Um, so I said in my alarm, all men are liars. And where does AI get its material? Right. Well, now I think I just saw something that now AI actually learns more from AI generated material now than from human sources. So we've already passed that point, right? So I mean that circularity of it itself should be a little bit of a cause for alarm. But the other and what that actually shows us, right, is that I mean, who actually thinks, right? So human beings are the ones who think. Human beings are the ones who actually can think in a reflective way, have creativity, have extended memory, have an ability to kind of think in a transcendent sort of way. So anything that AI generates, right, is ultimately coming from that because it's mimicry, right? AI is fundamentally, in a sense, a mimicry, and so there's the problem of if if AI is mimicking human beings, but then we begin to mimic AI, then we're actually undermining and really destroying kind of whatever kind of foundation there might have been for AI in the first place. Like, so there's the loss of the ability to reflect, right? And this is a thing that we really emphasize with our students, right? Because um, like if you find yourself depending on AI, you are going to be kind of an unthinking meme and a brute, right? This is classically what we would call somebody like that, a brute, right? And you're not fit for the ministry, right? But really, there's a sense in which we're not really fit to be human beings if we're not continuing to um, actually talk to each other, to reflect, to think about things, and not hand that over to AI. That's one thing to say. The other thing to say is then the circularity of AI becomes problematic because, especially depending on the training model, right? So, I mean, a lot of sort of general um, AI training is like, well, let me just collect what Reddit is saying about this, right? And that's the fact. So, if you actually know something about a subject and you ask AI about it, you'll find that AI actually makes mistakes all the time, right? AI doesn't actually have the ability to discern really what is kind of a mastery expertise on a topic. I mean, in spite of what Pastor Adel was just saying, I mean, there's some truth to that. Like it can actually get to a level that's pretty good, but there are other ways in which it just doesn't actually have the capacity um, because it's limited and it's framed and it's oriented in a certain way because of its programming. Okay, and there, I mean, I don't have time to get into all kinds of examples about that, but there are examples I could tell you about afterwards if you're interested. Um, what I usually use AI essentially to kind of fight with it, because I will say I do find it to be somewhat helpful. Like if I'm researching a new area and I just need to get oriented towards it, I will ask it what are like the key sources I should read on this, right? But it's sort of like in the military when you're investigating somebody to see if they should be given a top secret clearance. You don't depend on the references that they put down on their application, right? I mean, anybody who's ever been involved with this knows what I'm talking about. you go talk to their references and you ask for more references, and then you go talk to those references and you ask for more references, and then you finally you base your judgment on what the person that you're actually investigating has no idea, like, that you're talking to these people, right? And that's kind of how I use AI, and I use it in a way that's always argumentative, right? You can never take at face value what AI has to say because it hallucinates. So.
I'd like to hear from all four of you on this. As we're here, ACELC, why are we here? Errors in synod and our discussion about walking together in unity. If I could just hear from each of you, this is a tough ask, but like 30 seconds. From your unique perspective, what is the first and best thing that you think synod can do or we can do in synod to walk together and gain that unity that we're looking for?
Well, obviously we have convention coming up, so we can just agree at convention and everything will go swimmingly. But no, I mean, the ACELC was founded to talk about some things. And so at this point, we've been talking about those things for 15 years. That's well and good. Eventually, though, it does need to go to action. What are we doing if we're only talking all the time? Like, where have we 15 years later, are you where you wanted to be? And if the answer is no, why is it no? What have we done? What have we not done? And so that's, I mean, one of the things about I mean, you could be a think tank. That's fine. We need that kind of stuff. But eventually, it either has to go towards putting things in motion, and like I said, that means using polity. That means voting. It certainly always includes talking, but how would you like the synod to be better, and work towards that?
Yeah, I think I would like to see objective guardrails in the areas that are controversial, which, I mean, right now the two most controversial is probably still liturgy. I think those get brought up the most. Pastoral formation, I don't know how to go about that, but I think no one's going to be happy with what the guardrails are. You could maybe say LSP is already the guardrails, but obviously it's not actually the guardrails. But if we could all agree with some guardrails, I think that would maybe reel in specific things where it gets pretty wild, and it might be in different directions. But some kind of unified where there's an objective standard, because I think that's always helpful, right? A legal case is nice because you have to present data and there's going to be an objective kind of result. And if we had some objective guardrails in certain areas that everyone kind of agreed, however you go about finding those, that's above my pay grade. But I think that would be helpful, because then that's easier where you can say, you're doing this and we've all agreed you can't do this. But right now, there's a lot of back and forth. I'm like, well, this is okay because of XYZ context, whatever it is. But that'd be helpful. I don't know how to get to that point, but that would be helpful for conversations.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot I've been thinking about the last couple of days, actually, and hearing the speakers, and there've been some good points that have been brought up, but like Pastor Stecker said, well, if you disagree with somebody, don't just complain about them. Or I mean, you had the example of, like, don't make these lists of people you're not going to commune with. If you actually just and that totally makes sense, right? Just sort of on its face, right? If we're all in the ministerium, or we're all part of the Missouri Synod, we shouldn't, like, make up our own groups of fellowship. But like, sometimes, like, these are real issues that don't actually get dealt with, even if we follow the channels that are given to us, right? And I think this was part of Tim Wood's point yesterday, right? That the actual channels that we have to resolve some of these issues aren't effective. So that might be something to really think about as in the ACLC, right? I mean, if we need a new kind of, um, whatever it is, it's like he specifically, it's not I mean, that's what we call it now. It's a dispute resolution process, but really, it's something that's actually going to help us deal with false doctrine. Then maybe that's what we need to think about. dealing with at the bylaw or constitutional level, right? And working and developing the networks to actually make that happen, right? That's one thing. But on the other hand, right, we also need to, I think, take what Pastor Stecker said very seriously about what are we actually doing as a group, right? How do we sort of understand ourselves as a group, as a Missouri Synod, in relation to the world, right? And what is the purpose of the fighting that we have within ourselves, right? Sort of the internal conflict. And there might be in some cases it might really be important, it might be really worthwhile. But why is it important and why is it worthwhile? Because at the end of the day, we actually want to preach the gospel to the world, right? We should actually want to have confessional Lutheran congregations everywhere in the world so that all people can have access to the pure gospel, right? And so what should really be driving the internal conflict is a kind of clarity and a kind of focus that says, if this isn't really a doctrinal problem, then I'm not going to worry about it, right? I'm not going to hop on the internet and gossip about somebody, right? I'm not going to be tempted to fall into these Eighth Commandment issues. Like it's that pastor's job, right? Or it's that circuit visitor's job, or it's that DP's job. Let him handle it, right? It's not my job, right? I and this is that fine line that St. Paul himself is always talking about, right? To avoid strife, to avoid discord, to seek unity in everything that we can, right? To become all things to all people. When it's not a matter of what we teach scripturally, what is doctrinally required, that's what we have to do. On the other hand, if it's really a doctrinal issue, then let's lay those things out and let's actually engage them doctrinally. And this is, I think, gets back to the whole point about like, you have to know the Bible. You all have to know the Bible better than you do. Okay. You have to know the Bible, right? And I'll just give you an example. Like, we argue about worship. How many of you could actually explain the theological genealogy of what is behind contemporary worship and explain kind of the theological problems with it, right? It's not just about the fact that somebody uses an organ and somebody else uses a guitar, right? I've 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 gone to services that uses a guitar, right? The fact that it used a guitar is not the issue, right? There are actually theological assumptions and presuppositions and arguments that go into contemporary worship, or what is called in the scholarship praise and worship, right? So if this is actually an issue that you think is a doctrinal issue, do your research, read the Bible, and then actually talk about it in a brotherly way, as we've been kind of saying generally here. But you have to do it concretely, right? And you have to know what you're talking about, right? Because otherwise, you're just going to sit around and you're going to talk for another 15 years, and nothing's going to happen.
I'm a wannabe church historian, and people really don't like history. And one of the things they often say is, all right, what's the practical value? And I really dislike that, because I think there's something to just knowing our history that has immense value in and of itself. But one of the things I've learned in studying the 19th century is our age is not particularly horrible. We are not beset with troubles that our fathers in the faith didn't know before, right? And that brings some kind of comfort to me. And we are not, we are prone to uh, make everything into a catastrophe of like biblical proportion. And if I don't do something now, if I don't sign some document, if I don't join some group, the synod's going to collapse and hell's going to come. And that's just not true, right? Um, looking I think Walther had it worse than we did, right? I think the people I've studied in the 19th century had it worse than we did. And that brings a sense of comfort. It shouldn't bring a sense of indifference or sloth, but it brings a sense of proportionality. And one of the things I've tried to do since I've been ordained is recognize what my call is. I don't have a call to be the theologian of the world. I don't have a call to be the theologian. I'm not called to serve everyone in the Missouri Synod. My call is Concordia University Chicago. My call is to teach the students there. And that doesn't mean I'm indifferent to what's outside of Concordia Chicago, but I really need to think about my priorities and what I'm spending my time doing. And I'm called to those students. I'm called to teach them. I'm called to catechize them. The Lutheran students, I'm called to help make them better Lutherans by God's grace, right? That he can use, if he can, speak through a donkey, perhaps he can speak through a Texan, right? And that perhaps he's using me to be a means to help these students become better Lutherans, and for our non-Lutheran students to have a better understanding of our Lord and his gospel. And that's brought a lot of clarity and to what I do, and a lot of joy as well. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but
Micah Gaunt, pastor at Peace Lutheran Church in Hastings, Nebraska. And this question is for all of you. Maybe a little bit in the same vein as what we just heard. I'm interested in, so with all the sides coming together at the table, I'm interested in foundational things that have a cascading effect to move us. So maybe there's at least 2 or 3 things here. What are the topics, or where is there already consensus that we can move from? Like, what are some foundational things that we can already move from? What are some of the foundational topics we need to address? I think there's maybe a difference in those 2 questions. And then I'd also be interested, Dr. Grobing, as you talk about the slogan drift, and especially regarding the way I heard it, justification and law and gospel. How do you see, say, for example, at the circuit level, us leveraging, addressing the slogan drift? How do we leverage that to bring some more consensus and unity?
so things that we already have in common, and maybe I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think where we do have agreement, and what can we build from, right? And then how do we kind of it, I think you were kind of just saying maybe to elaborate a little bit on kind of what I was talking about, like how do we avoid like the slogan drift a little bit more? Or, yeah.
How do you use that to address certain things that we are in this?
Okay. Well, again, I mean, I think what do we agree on, right? We all we agree that we want to evangelize the world, right? We all agree about that. Somebody asked me about the confessional versus missional slogan, right? I mean, I don't. I'm not saying that there aren't issues that are sort of in what we might call a confessional group or a missional group, but at the end of the day, like this, like recognizing that we want the world to hear the gospel, to repent of their sins, and through the merits of Jesus Christ to be reconciled to God the Father. Like that is something that we agree on, right? So and so a place that we can start talking about that is through the confessions, right? See, they go together, right? Confessions and evangelism, right? Like this is actually what the confessions are interested in, right? This is why Luther and Melanchthon are so upset, right? Because the gospel of salvation is being clouded, right? And so the Lutherans confess the confessions because they want to restore clarity to the salvation of souls, right? And so if there's a way that we can just kind of remember that, right? This is why we are confessional. And then to begin, if we can read the confessions in that way and see what did they see as being important, right? And can we restore the importance of those things in our own mission, in our own evangelism, and really, and again, like tie that to the scriptures, right? What are they drawing from the scriptures that compels them to confess this, right? And so these are the kinds of things that, I mean, I think again, justification is one of those things, right? And being able to talk fluently about justification. Then I don't know at this point if I have more to say about that. Maybe I didn't kind of fully understand the kind of scope of your question, but this is how the study of the scriptures and the confessions should be actually motivating to us to come to agreement and to evangelize, right? And if we spend our time actually thinking about that, thinking about submitting ourselves to the Word of God and what we believe, teach, and confess, and working with one another for that purpose, I don't know. I mean, is that a common ground that we can begin to work from? Maybe.
Yeah, I'll jump to the second one. I think one thing that's definitely shown in kind of that younger demographic we were talking about that's returning to the church is they are very intellectually oriented. And the way you can track this is you can just see go and see which public speakers have millions of views. Okay. And they are speaking at like a master's type level. Right. So I think I remember early on someone told me, you should speak at like a freshman in high school level. Okay. And I don't think that's accurate. And that's not what particularly those young people are looking for, because they are exposed to intellectual speakers in mass. They are spending hours a week. They might watch cat videos too, but they're also watching, very intellectual thinkers. So what does that mean? I think that means what Dr. Grobien was saying before. Like, we really need to know our scriptures. We really need to be in contact with the questions that people are asking, that we might come in contact with, and then form very, very thoughtful theological answers to these questions. I think that shines some light on what we should be doing for pastoral training. And I think that more than ever, the bar should be higher, not lower on that front, because I think you can do a lot of damage if someone who's thinking through things comes and asks a serious question and you give a slogan type answer. They'll see through that right away. And they're used to sifting through that at a remarkable speed on the internet, of kind of sensing someone that doesn't actually know what they're talking about. So they're very calibrated to that. So I think we need more than ever pastors, educated lay individuals that can speak very thoughtfully into those areas. And maybe that's something we can unite around, because I think people on both sides, whatever those different sides are, I think if they've got their finger on the pulse of that, they'll be able to see that. They'll know that anecdotally. And that might give us at least a little bit of a framework to talk about things like pastoral formation. And it might also distract us a little bit, because now we've got to spend a lot of time thinking through and reading and researching so we can have thoughtful answers to real questions. And that gives you less time for infighting in an unnecessary way.
Yeah, I agree with James. I don't think we're in a terrible time. I think we have a lot of good guys, a lot of good laymen. I think we have a lot of guys preaching at a high level. And I think one of the things that people pick up on is insincerity, or if you're just blowing them off with a slogan or something like that. Now, to Professor Grobien's probably shock, I don't when I have vicars, I don't drill them heavily on, you have to do your sermon this way, you have to do this, that, and the other. I mean, obviously I critique. They have to show it to me before they preach it. But one of the basics I just tell them is like, you have to actually care about something in the text. You have to care yourself, and that has to be able to come through, because if you don't care about the word of God that you are preaching to them, then surely no one else will either. And so, as you said, you have to love the scriptures. You have to have men as preachers who love the scriptures and care about what they find there, because what they find there is relevant and life-giving and salvific. And that I think we do have a lot of that going on. Would we like greater returns? Sure. Do we need media? I like Pastor Stecker's talk about we need media putting our best foot forward and talking about the beauty of what we read in the scriptures, and that is for everyone. So I think that is something that could be improved kind of synod wide, and maybe even something that synod should put more time and effort and funds into. But I think on a city to city, parish to parish level, I think there is a lot of good going on. So I'm not catastrophizing. I'm not blackpilling.
Hi, my name is Jack, and I'm a student from Fort Wayne, Dr. Grobing's student. And so I have a question for you about the slogans. This is something I've encountered from other denominations as well. That, for instance, you'll hear people say, "One true church," "legal fiction," or "deeds not creed," or "it's a relationship, not a religion." And so, in what way should like seminarians or new pastors or just students of God's word how to understand these slogans better and how to engage people from other traditions in a more effective way?
Real quick before Dr. Grobing speaks, there is a podcast out there by the Schley twins, Jesse and Joe Schley. Does anyone know what it's called? What is it? Yeah, that's right. The Didymus podcast because they're twins, right? But they do, at least for a while, they were doing this. They might still do this, where they tackle slogans and kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct. So there's a good resource out there. That's another good podcast. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much to add than what has already been said. I mean, I think again, Pastor Stecker already mentioned it um, in his initial presentation. Like, this is why they've gone to long form, right? As he just said, people are really actually interested in, fundamentally in high level kind of understanding, even if it takes them time. And that's just whoever we're interacting with, right? We have to get back to spending time with people. We have to do it face to face. I mean, again, this ties in with what he was saying about social media, right? And reorienting yourself to the people that are in front of you. And then if you can talk to somebody, you're going to understand what do they mean by deeds, not creeds, right? What do they mean by relationship, not religion, right? Because there's so many different ways you can kind of parse that out, right? So what do they mean? You're only going to know by talking with them, right?
actually have one more thought on that, kind of anecdotally. So, as an example, there was a podcast maybe a year and a half ago or so. I was dialoguing with an individual that we would have differed on, like progressive sanctification, and so we were kind of going back and forth. And I was, at first I was like, how can you deny this, right? So we talked for a while, and then eventually at the end, through maybe 30 or 40 minutes of talking, I said, okay, well, do you think that a Christian over the course of his life should be able to improve in tangible areas? Maybe overcome lust, or maybe start to undermine pride and cultivate humility. And he's like, well, yeah, of course. Right. So, so we got to the point where there might be, some more things you could dive into, but at least at first glance, we actually agreed on those things, but he was hung up on the term, or, that's where we were disagreeing. So, but it took 30, 40 minutes to realize at first glance, my characterization of what he was thinking was actually incorrect, right? It was much more nuanced, and we actually had much more common ground after 30, 40 minutes of unpacking that. We still disagreed on some terminology, but that's a different ongoing discussion than what it seemed like at first glance. So there's an example where, 30, 40 minutes of talking can sometimes help you realize where there are some areas of commonality, and then you can actually be arguing what's really the discussion point.